The morning regular. The steam from brewing oolong curled like a question mark above Mei Lin's head as she arranged teacups in the display window. Through the glass, autumn painted Vermont's mountains in fiery colors, a backdrop to her small tea shop nestled in the historic district of Mapleton. 6 months since opening Steep and Story, and the morning routine still filled her with quiet contentment. "Good morning, Ms. Lin." His voice, soft yet distinct, arrived precisely at 8:15 like a well-tuned clock. Ethan Parker, tall, with gentle eyes that never quite met hers for long. His fingers, always ink-stained at the tips, reached for the same corner table by the window overlooking the river. "The usual?" May asked, already preparing his preferred jasmine pearls. "Please." He smiled, that same reserved curve of lips that revealed nothing but politeness. For 3 months, this dance had continued. He would arrive, order jasmine tea, open his leather-bound journal, and write for exactly 90 minutes before leaving a generous tip and a quiet "thank you." No personal questions, no small talk beyond pleasantries. Today, however, something changed. As May approached with his tea, she noticed his journal open to a page filled not with writing, but with intricate sketches of her shop. The antique teapots, the bookshelves along the wall, and in the corner, a delicate rendering of herself reaching for tea leaves. "You're an artist." The words escaped before she could catch them. His hands quickly moved to close the journal, but hesitated. "Just observations. They're beautiful." She set down his tea, fingertips brushing against the saucer. "I didn't realize I was being studied so carefully." A flush crept across his face. "I should have asked permission." "Perhaps you could pay your artistic debt by telling me why a man who clearly belongs in a gallery spends every morning writing in a tea shop in small-town Vermont." His eyes, a deep amber she'd never properly noticed before, finally met hers fully. "How do you know where I belong?" "The same way you knew to draw the crack in that teapot that I've hidden facing the wall." May gestured to his sketch. "You see things others miss." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Is that a compliment or an accusation?" "Neither. An observation of my own." She tucked a strand of black hair behind her ear. "Your tea will get cold." As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "I'm hiding, I suppose." May looked back. "From what?" "Expectations." He traced the edge of his journal. "I inherited my father's architecture firm in Boston. Everyone's waiting for me to return from what they assume is grief leave and take my place at the helm of a $100 million company. And instead you're here, drinking tea and drawing teapots. Well, finding myself, losing myself, one of those cliches." He shrugged. "What about you? This isn't just a tea shop." He nodded toward the bookshelves lining the walls, filled with novels in multiple languages. May smiled. "My grandmother was a storyteller in Beijing. I grew up believing tea loosens stories from the soul, so I created a place for both." For the first time, Ethan Parker's smile reached his eyes. "May I draw you properly sometime? Not just sketches and margins?" The question hung between them, weighted with unspoken possibilities. "Tomorrow," she replied. "Come at closing time instead." After he left, May found a folded page torn from his journal under the saucer. A perfect drawing of her hands pouring tea, with words beneath, "Some people hide in plain sight. Others are simply waiting to be truly seen." She slipped the page into her pocket, where it rested against her skin like a whispered secret. Tea leaves and truth. The evening light painted long shadows across the wooden floor as May turned the sign to closed. Outside, maple leaves spiraled, down like nature's confetti, and the usually bustling street had quieted to occasional footsteps. She hadn't changed from her day outfit, a simple emerald dress with a gray cardigan, but her hair now fell loose around her shoulders instead of its usual practical bun. The bell above the door chimed softly. Ethan stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the autumn sunset, holding something wrapped in brown paper. "You came," May said, surprised by the slight tremor in her voice. "Did you think I wouldn't?" He stepped inside, the scent of cedar and rain following him. "People say they'll return all the time. It doesn't mean they will." She gestured toward the back room. "I thought we might sit there. The light is better." The small space behind the main shop held a worn leather sofa, a reading lamp, and walls lined with more books, personal ones in Chinese, English, and French. A small electric kettle sat on a side table beside jars of loose-leaf tea. "Your sanctuary," Ethan observed, his eyes taking in every detail. "My grandmother called it a pocket universe, a space that exists between worlds." May filled the kettle. She believed everyone needs such a place. As water heated, Ethan unwrapped his package, a proper sketchbook and a wooden case of charcoal pencils. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the sofa. May nodded, sitting across from him in a weathered armchair. "How should I pose?" "Just be." His eyes studied her with such intensity that she felt a warmth spreading across her skin. "Tell me about the stories on your shelves while I draw." So she did. She spoke of magical realism novels from South America, ancient Chinese poetry, and contemporary fiction that made her laugh and weep. All the while, his hands moved across the paper, his focus absolute yet somehow tender. "What about your story?" he finally asked, looking up from his sketch. "How does someone with literature degrees from Yale and Columbia end up running a tea shop in Vermont?" May's hand stilled against her teacup. "You've researched me. I noticed your diplomas in the office when I used your restroom last week." His voice was apologetic. "Professional habit. I observe spaces." She sighed. "I was a professor for 3 years. Comparative literature. Then my grandmother got sick, and I came home to care for her." Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. "After she died, returning to academia felt hollow. She left me her tea recipes and her stories. This place honors both." "Do you regret leaving your career?" "Sometimes. But regret is just nostalgia for a path not taken." May met his gaze. "Your turn. What does Boston's architectural prodigy regret?" Ethan set down his charcoal. "My father built a company designing luxury high-rises. When he died 6 months ago, I was expected to continue his legacy." His jaw tightened. 3 weeks after his funeral, I learned he'd cut corners on materials for his last project, a residential tower in Malaysia. It developed structural problems. Nobody was hurt, but hundreds of people lost their homes and savings. "And you've been running ever since?" "Not running. Thinking." His hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly. "About what to build in place of what he destroyed." May moved to sit beside him on the sofa. "May I see what you've drawn?" He handed her the sketchbook, their fingers brushing in the exchange. On the page, she saw herself. Not just her physical form, but something more. The way her eyes creased when she spoke of books she loved. How her hands moved like birds in flight when describing poetry. He had captured not just her appearance, but her essence. "You see too much," she whispered. "Not enough," he countered, his voice low. "Never enough of you." When his hand touched her cheek, time seemed to suspend. His lips found hers with gentle questioning that deepened into certainty. Her fingers traced the curve of his jaw, the solidity of his shoulders. Between kisses, he murmured, "I've wanted to do that since the first morning I saw you reaching for tea leaves in the early light." "Why didn't you?" "Some treasures should be approached slowly," he said against her hair. Outside, twilight surrendered to darkness, and inside, 2 people who had been hiding from different pasts found temporary shelter in each other's arms. Storm warnings, The November storm arrived without mercy, lashing rain against windows and howling down chimneys throughout Mapleton. Inside Steep and Story, May watched water begin to seep under the front door as the ancient gutter system failed. "We need to move everything up," she said, panic edging her voice as she rushed toward the bookshelves. Some volumes were irreplaceable, her grandmother's handwritten recipe books, first editions of beloved novels. Ethan, who had been helping her close when the storm hit, was already stacking crates. "The basement will flood first. What's down there?" "Tea storage, extra furniture, financial records." May grabbed towels from behind the counter. "The electrical panel, too." They worked in synchronized urgency, carrying boxes upstairs to her small apartment above the shop. Rain hammered relentlessly as wind rattled the windows. With each trip up the narrow staircase, the water at street level rose higher. On their third trip down, Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, declined the call, then switched it off entirely. "That's the fifth call you've ignored," May noted, passing him another box of books. "It's nothing. It's something." She paused, water soaking the hem of her jeans. "Your real life calling?" Lightning flashed, illuminating his troubled expression. "This is real life, May. Here, now." The power went out before she could respond, plunging them into blue-gray darkness. Ethan's hand found hers in the gloom. "Where do you keep candles?" Upstairs, they created a small island of light in her living room. Rain drummed against the skylights as they sat surrounded by rescued books and tea canisters. May's apartment reflected her personality, minimalist yet warm, with floor cushions around a low table, watercolor paintings of Chinese landscapes, and a small, upright piano in the corner. "You play?" Ethan asked, noticing her glance toward the instrument. "Badly." She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "It was my grandmother's. Like everything meaningful in my life." "Not everything." His eyes held hers in the candlelight. "The past 3 weeks have been meaningful, at least to me." Since that first evening in the back room, they had developed a new routine. Days he would come for morning tea. Evenings, they would close the shop together, talking for hours about architecture and literature, about childhood memories and future dreams. They had shared more kisses, more embraces, but always stopped at the threshold of greater intimacy, both aware of unspoken barriers. "Your phone keeps ringing because people need you back in Boston," she said quietly. "The life you're avoiding hasn't disappeared." Ethan moved closer, his warmth a contrast to the chill in the room. "I'm not avoiding life. I'm finding it. With me." The question held vulnerability she hadn't intended to reveal. His answer was to pull her against him, his lips finding hers with new urgency. The storm outside matched the one within as they surrendered to what had been building between them for weeks. Her hands slipped beneath his shirt, tracing the contours of his back. His fingers tangled in her hair as he whispered her name against her neck. They moved to her bedroom, where candlelight cast dancing shadows across white walls. Each piece of discarded clothing was a barrier removed, each caress a question answered. When their bodies finally joined, May felt something unlock within her, a door she hadn't realized was closed. After, they lay tangled in sheets, the storm still raging beyond the windows. Ethan traced patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch reverent. "I have to go back," he said finally, words heavy in the darkness. "But not for the reasons you think." May propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face. "Tell me." "The company needs to make amends. Real ones, not just PR statements. I've been working remotely on a plan to rebuild what was lost in Malaysia at our expense, better than before." His eyes were earnest in the flickering light. "I've been hiding here because I was afraid of failing. But you've reminded me what courage looks like." Before she could respond, a sharp crack split the night, followed by the sound of breaking glass downstairs. "The front window?" May gasped. Already reaching for clothes, they rushed down to find a fallen branch had shattered the display window. Rain and wind poured in, soaking everything. As they worked to cover the opening with plastic sheeting, emergency vehicles appeared on the street, their lights flashing through the darkness. A firefighter approached through the rain. "We're evacuating this block. The river's breaching upstream." Then, looking more closely at Ethan, his expression changed. "Wait, aren't you Ethan Parker? From Parker Architectural?" May turned to see Ethan's face go still, his secret identity suddenly exposed in the harsh emergency lights. The vanishing morning revealed a town transformed. The rain had stopped, but Mapleton's streets resembled canals, reflecting slate-colored sky and muddy water. Emergency crews worked to restore power as residents emerged to assess damage. May stood in her shop, surveying the destruction. The broken window had allowed water to saturate everything. Books warped, teacups shattered on the floor, furniture waterlogged. The financial loss was devastating. But worse was the hollow feeling in her chest where hope had resided just hours before. Ethan had vanished during the night. After the firefighter recognized him, everything happened quickly. More emergency workers arrived, evacuating the block. In the chaos, Ethan had been pulled away to help coordinate with town officials, his architectural expertise suddenly valuable as they assessed structural damage to the historic district. "I'll be right back," he had promised, squeezing her hand before disappearing into the night, but he hadn't returned. And when evacuation orders forced May to shelter at the community center until dawn, she found herself scanning every face in the crowd, finding strangers instead of him. Now, as she salvaged what she could from the wreckage of her shop, her phone remained silent. No calls, no messages. Nothing but the memory of his skin against hers and the bitter taste of abandonment. "May, thank goodness you're all right." Eleanor, who owned the flower shop 2 doors down, waded through the doorway in rubber boots. "Have you heard the news?" "About what?" May asked, barely looking up from the soggy book she was trying to save. "About Ethan Parker. It's all over social media." Eleanor held out her phone. "He's some kind of millionaire architect from Boston. Apparently, he's pledged $1 million toward flood relief for Mapleton. The mayor just announced it." May's hand stilled as she stared at the screen. There he was, her Ethan, looking polished and professional beside the mayor. Nothing like the quiet man who had sketched in her shop and whispered against her skin in darkness. "He said he's been staying here while working on a major project," Eleanor continued, oblivious to May's shock. "Nobody had any idea we had such an important person in town." "Did you know?" "No," May said quietly. "I didn't know him at all." The next 3 days passed in a blur of insurance adjusters, cleanup crews, and sleepless nights. May worked mechanically, scrubbing floors and calling suppliers, never allowing herself to check her phone for messages that didn't come. On the 4th morning, a courier arrived with an envelope bearing the Parker Architectural letterhead. Inside was a check for an amount that made May's knees buckle, along with a handwritten note, "For repairs. No strings attached. I'm sorry." The paper crumpled in her fist as anger finally broke through her numbness. She grabbed her coat and car keys. 3 hours later, she stood in the gleaming lobby of Parker Tower in downtown Boston, her practical boots leaving faint watermarks on the marble floor. The receptionist eyed her warily. "I need to see Ethan Parker. Do you have an appointment?" "Tell him Maylin is here. He'll know what it's about." 10 minutes of tense waiting later, an elegant woman in a tailored suit approached. "Ms. Lynn? I'm Victoria Winters, Mr. Parker's executive assistant. I'm afraid he's unavailable today. However, he asked me to ensure any concerns about your donation were addressed immediately." "My donation?" May repeated. "Yes. Mr. Parker has arranged for full restoration funding for your business. Is there an issue with the payment?" May stared at her, understanding dawning with painful clarity. She wasn't a person to him, she was a project. Another problem to be solved with money. "Please return this to Mr. Parker," she said, placing the uncashed check on the reception desk. "Tell him Stephen's story isn't for sale." As she turned to leave, she nearly collided with a man entering the lobby and found herself looking up into familiar amber eyes. Ethan stood frozen, his expression shifting from shock to something like desperate hope. He wore a tailored suit that transformed him into someone both familiar and foreign. Behind him stood a group of business people clutching portfolios. "May!" he breathed, as though her name was both prayer and punishment. "Meeting adjourned," he told the confused group without looking away from her. "Victoria, reschedule everything." Then, Before May could protest, he took her elbow and guided her toward a private elevator. "You left," she said as the doors closed, trapping them together. "Without a word." "I tried to come back that night." "The roads were closed." His voice was urgent. "I called your phone repeatedly. Left messages." "I lost my phone in the flood," she realized, the anger that had carried her to Boston beginning to waver. "But you could have—" What remains unwritten December painted Mapleton with fresh snow, transforming flood-damaged streets into a pristine wonderland. Holiday lights twinkled in shop windows along Main Street, including the newly restored facade of Steep & Story. May adjusted the wreath on her door, surveying her shop with mixed emotions. Everything looked perfect, better than before even. New shelving displayed books protected behind glass doors. Comfortable chairs invited lingering. The scent of cinnamon and jasmine mingled in the air, all rebuilt without Ethan's money, but with his designs. Their compromise had come after hours of conversation in his Boston office that day. She had refused his check but accepted his architectural plans, implementing them with her own insurance money and a small business disaster loan. He had respected her independence while offering his professional expertise, sending contractors he trusted but never imposing. For 2 months, they had maintained a careful distance, connected through renovation updates and occasional texts, but nothing more. No mention of the night they had shared. No acknowledgement of feelings left suspended between them. The bell above the door chimed, pulling May from her thoughts. Mrs. Whitaker, her first customer of the day, shuffled in with her usual smile. "Everything looks wonderful, dear. You've brought this place back beautifully." "Thank you." May led her to a table. "Your usual Earl Grey?" As she prepared the tea, May's eyes drifted to the corner table by the window, empty as it had been every morning for 61 days. Not that she was counting. The grand reopening celebration was scheduled for tomorrow evening, a small gathering of loyal customers and neighbors who had supported her through the rebuilding. She had sent an invitation to Ethan's Boston office, received a polite RSVP from his assistant, nothing more. The day passed in preparation, arranging pastries, setting out fresh flowers, polishing teapots that had survived the flood. When evening fell, May locked up and climbed the stairs to her renovated apartment, trying to ignore the hollow feeling that success couldn't quite fill. Her phone chimed with a message notification. "Ethan, can I see you before tomorrow's event?" Her heart stuttered as she typed, "When?" His response came immediately. "Now. I'm outside." May moved to her window, looking down at the snow-covered street. There he stood, a tall figure in a dark coat looking up at her window with snowflakes catching in his hair. 5 minutes later, she opened the shop's side door. They stood facing each other, breath clouding in the cold air, words momentarily lost. "You look well," he finally said. "So do you." A lie. He looked exhausted, thinner, his eyes shadowed despite the elegant coat and scarf. He gestured to the shop. "Everything turned out beautifully, thanks to your designs and your vision." He shifted, uncharacteristically nervous. "May I come in? There's something I need to tell you." Upstairs in her apartment, Ethan stood awkwardly in the space they had once navigated with such intimacy. May made tea, a simple gesture to occupy her trembling hands. "I've sold my father's company," he said abruptly. The teacup rattled against its saucer. "What?" "I finalized the sale last week. To a collective of the employees." He accepted the tea she offered. "I kept enough shares to ensure the Malaysia rebuilding project continues, but otherwise I'm unburdened." "But it was your legacy. Some legacies shouldn't be continued." His eyes held hers. "I've started something new. A smaller firm focused on community restoration and sustainable design." He hesitated. "The kind of work that would let me base myself anywhere." The implication hung between them, fragile as a soap bubble. "Why are you telling me this?" May asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because every design I've created since November begins with a tea shop." He set down his cup. "Because I've been sitting in sterile coffee shops in Boston, trying to find the inspiration I only ever found here. With you." He reached into his coat and withdrew his sketchbook, a new one. I've been drawing what I couldn't say. The pages revealed her, not just her face and form, but moments. May laughing as she described a book to a customer. May concentrating as she measured tea leaves. May in candlelight during the storm. Page after page of memories, preserved in charcoal and ink. I made a mistake, May. I thought rebuilding structures was enough, but... She silenced him with a finger against his lips. Show me your new designs. Confused, he turned to the back of the sketchbook. There she found sketches of a modern building integrated with nature, glass walls embracing rather than dominating the landscape, living roofs, communal spaces. It's beautiful, she said. Where will you build it? There's land for sale at the edge of town. Near the river. His voice grew uncertain. If I were to stay in Mapleton. May closed the sketchbook, her decision made. The guest bedroom needs work. The closet's too small and the lighting is terrible. He stared at her. What? If an architect were to stay here while establishing a local office, he'd find the guest room inadequate for long-term use. Her eyes challenged him. He'd need to renovate. Understanding dawned in his face, followed by cautious hope. How long-term are we discussing? That depends. She moved closer. On whether he remembers that some treasures should be approached slowly, but held tightly once found. His hands framed her face with architect's precision and lover's tenderness. I never forgot. Not for a single day. When their lips met, it felt like returning to a beloved book, knowing both the comfort of familiar pages and the thrill of discovering passages previously overlooked. Outside, snow continued to fall on Mapleton, covering old scars and creating clean slates. Inside, two people who had been searching for different things found. Themselves writing a new chapter together, one in which neither past nor future overshadowed the simple miracle of the present moment. The next evening, as Stephen's story filled with well-wishers celebrating its rebirth, May and Ethan moved through the crowd together, their hands occasionally brushing in subtle recognition of newly rebuilt connections. When someone asked if the handsome architect was planning other projects in town, May smiled and reached for a teapot. Every good story, she said, pouring steaming jasmine tea into waiting cups, begins with characters who find themselves exactly where they're meant to be, even when they least expect it. Ethan's eyes met hers across the crowded shop, a private smile passing between them, acknowledgement that sometimes what remains unwritten holds the greatest promise of all.